Hello, this is a video on drawing a primrose in graphite powder and pencil. So it's Faber Castell 9000 pencils I'm using again. This original of primrose was drawn from my Nature's Patterns exhibition, and the scale is just a little bit bigger than A3. So I wanted to use graphite powder because it was on a larger size. Now, those of you that have seen the pansy video, where I've also been using graphite powder, this is a little different. So in this case, I'm using a small round brush because this is a lot more delicate and very fine. So you can see that I've drawn out the basic shape of the petal. So you've got a petal on the left, a petal on the right, and this is the petal underneath in between the two with a central vein. So I have drawn out, I don't know if you can see, but I have actually drawn out where the veins are, and now I'm going over with a tiny amount of graphite powder over the top. And I'm kind of graduating with it as well, so I'm putting a little bit more on right in the middle along the vein, and then I'm taking it out, taking my pressure off with the brush. So it's a slow process. Eventually I'm going to go back in with my pencils just to sort of get a bit more detail in, but for the moment all I'm trying to do is get a feeling of the texture and the tones, so I can get that in first of all and then build up when I can see what I've got. Now, the primrose, very delicate, very light. It's a very pale yellow. So I don't want to use too many darks. I don't want to go in too soon, because if you do that with graphite powder, you have a heck of a job getting it out again. So as I said before in my other video, just be really careful that when you put your graphite powder on, you only put a small amount on at a time and build it up very gradually. So don't dip the end of your round brush into the pot of graphite powder and put it on, because all that will happen is that you'll end up with masses and masses of powder all over the surface, which you'll then have to try and move about, and then you'll end up with it looking muddy and messy, and then you've got to take it out with a putty eraser, and it really isn't worth it. You do need a lot of patience to build it up, and you think you're not getting anywhere, but trust me, the more time you spend on it, the better. Okay, so I've just got that little central section in, and now I'm redrawing the two petals in front. So I'm going in on this occasion with an HB, and you can see again I'm graduating. That is, I'm trying to get an edge to the petal rather than a line. You don't really want a line because that looks more cartoon-like. If you're trying to make something look realistic, all it is just the effect of light and shadow on something. The edge of the petal, we can see it's the edge of the petal just purely because there's a shadow underneath and the edge of the petal is lighter. So you have to achieve that by your shading. So you press firmly with the correct pencil, depending on what tone it is, the colour of the flower, and then you put your hardest pressure in where the edge is, and then immediately you take your pressure off as you graduate out, or in this case. Altogether on this primrose, in addition to the graphite powder, I have used 4H all the way through up to HB, because as I said, it's a very light yellow. So just coming in now, a little bit more pressure, a little bit more depth. Remember that with the various different pencils that you use, you've got the H grades with the more clay in them. The higher the number next to the H, the more clay there is in it, so the lighter it is. the higher the number next to the B, the softer it is and the more graphite content there is, so the darker it will be. So just as you have different pressure that you can exert on the pencil, you can use different pencils as well to get different effects. Now back to the round brush with my graphite powder. So now I'm doing the left petal. So I've dipped in the end into a tiny area of graphite powder and I'm carefully building it up. And on that petal, there is an area that's fluted, and you've got sort of areas that are receding and then coming out towards you. And I'm trying to get that effect by using the powder. Very, very lightly. The advantage of doing that is that obviously when you're using a pencil, you get your pencil lines, and if something is very soft, as this subject is, if you use graphite powder, it's going to be a lot softer and a lot easier to get that effect. So just watch how I build it up slowly. I should say at this point, if you have put too much on the end of your brush, and the worst comes to the worst and you've got loads of powder on there, do not fear, because you can use a cotton wool pad just to sort of brush it off, or you can use a clean, very clean brush and brush the residue off. Be very careful not to blow the residue off with your breath, because you don't want any moisture to get onto the paper and for the graphite powder to attach onto that. So there you can see I was using cotton wool pad just to take off any residue. Right, this is a different brush. This is a flat brush, very tiny flat brush, which I think is excellent for getting along very tiny lines, detailed areas. Because you can come along on the side and push the graphite powder along almost as if you were doing that with a pencil. You see? So then you can brush the residue off again with the cotton wool pad and then go along, gradually getting in all the various different patterns. And at this point you can see it kind of come in together. We're not there yet, but it's starting to come. So you continue on with the flat brush. Now there are kind of ridged areas along the petal coming across in a different direction. So you'll see me going in with the flat brush coming across the areas that I've put underneath. So just watch through and hopefully you'll see what I mean. As I progress and get a little bit more in. Again, to remind you, the brushes that I'm using are nylon brushes. What you need to make sure is that you get a pack that has a mixture, ideally, of round, flat, filbert brushes. A mixture of all of those. and try and get them in different sizes as well, because depending on what you're drawing, you're going to need different sizes. If you were using powder to do a really large area of background, for instance, you'd want a really large brush, because it would take you too long if you were doing it with a small one. But for this sort of thing, you want very fine detail. Okay, so you can always use your cotton wool pad to get off residue, but you can also use it, and it's really important, to push the graphite powder into the surface as well, particularly if you're doing something like a background with powder, because it does have a tendency to just sort of sit on the surface. So if you use something like a cotton wool pad, it will push it in and blend it. You can also use tortillons, you can use stumps. It really just depends on the size that you're doing of a particular area. So I'm just building up a little bit of tone there, and you should be able to see there's areas of light, there's areas of mid-tone, and I'm starting to get a feeling of depth to it now and contrast. And then in a moment, once I've started to build up all of these different areas where the petal is fluted, I'm going to come in with a putty eraser and take out areas of highlight as well. So you can leave the paper white for areas of highlight, but you can also take it out with a putty eraser. Okay, this is a H pencil. Remember I said I was using Faber Castell 9000 pencils, and I was using between 4H and HB. So this is the H, which is the mid-range, so kind of about half and half graphite and clay. And now I want to get a little bit more detail in there, which really I can only do with my pencil, just to get that little tiny bit of clarity in there. It really depends what effect you're after. If you're after something which is a much looser sort of style, then graphite powder is fabulous for that. You can just sort of give an impressionistic look to your work. But you can also use it if you want to do photorealism. It's quite versatile, but you've just got to get used to it, really. So very light pressure, very light, very controlled. Just trying to give a subtle effect of light and shade by using my pressure. And using a tortillon as well, just to soften even more in areas. And now I'm adding a little bit of depth, and then coming along with a little bit more graphite powder again to build up a little bit of depth. You can keep switching between graphite powder and pencil as many times as you want to. As long as you do it in a methodical way and you don't put too much on and you're slow and build it up, it's fine. Now this is a Maped putty eraser. So I've pulled it out to a nice rounded edge, and now I'm coming along and you can see I'm taking out areas of highlight where the petal is rounded and the light is catching it. And this is quite satisfying, this, because it really does kind of give you a finishing touch. So go gradual. And the beauty of a putty eraser is that it is so soft and so pliable, and it really isn't very harsh. So although we're using it as a rubber, you're using it more as a technique, because it doesn't actually take away the surface of the paper. So if I'd taken a bit out and I thought, oh, I've taken too much out, I want to go back in again, I can do quite easily with my pencils or indeed with my graphite powder. The only thing to be careful with the putty is that you don't push it in too hard. Stroke it over the surface. Everything's got to be quite light and quite delicate. So here you go. Going back in with my flat brush now to blend and put a bit more powder on. And this is the kind of finishing touches of that area. So that's just a little short demo of how to use graphite powder when you're drawing a primrose. Have fun, experiment and play around. Take care, bye.